Okay, so we're picking up our studies with chapter 19 of the book of Genesis, chapter 19. And if you have the Eitz Chaim, we're on page 104. 104, but either way. I want to remind you of what we looked at last week, which was these three angels taken to be men who visit Abraham and Sarah. Abraham shows himself to be a master of hospitality as he rushes out to greet them, invites them in, promised them a little something, gives them a lavish meal. And then they also announce that Sarah will give birth to a child, remarkably, given that she is beyond the age of conceiving. She finds this laughable. God tells Abraham about it, but when God tells Abraham, God does not reveal that she said Abraham was too old, only that she was too old. God concerned more about their marriage, perhaps, than the complete truth. At least that's how the rabbis saw it. And then it is revealed that God is going down to check out what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. This outcry has come to God. And Abraham then, as you probably recall, bargains for those cities, starting with 50, working his way down to 10. Will you spare the cities even for the sake of 10? It's unresolved, except that we know, and God said yes, and presumably there were not 10, and we're going to see that also right now. So with that background, which is important, I think, we are at chapter 19, beginning with verse 1. So we get two of the three here, not called angels, not called people, but angels. Now there were three. One goes off. Presumably, remember that angels are not multitaskers. So one was there to announce the birth of Isaac, and now the other two are going down to check things out. It's worth noting that in biblical law, in Exodus, and ever since in Talmudic law also, you need two witnesses in order to establish something. Right? So here, we're sending two witnesses. God said God will go down and see, but presumably these are an extension of God in some way, God's agents, and they are the ones who are there to determine what's happened, not just on the basis of rumors, but actual evidence. So they go down, they go to Sodom in the evening, Ba'erev, and Lot is Yoshev Bishar Sodom. He is sitting in the gate of Sodom. So the gate of the city, as you probably know, is a very important place. It is not merely an entranceway. It is a place of commerce. It's typically the place where the law courts reside. Anyone who has a matter that requires judges or adjudication goes to the law courts. That's one of the reasons we see Mordechai at the beginning of the book of Esther. He is sitting in the gate, and we have a sense that he is some sort of official. Not a major one, certainly not on the level of Haman, but a minor one. So this idea of the gate in the story of Ruth, we see when Boaz wants to claim the right to marry Ruth and to acquire her lands, he goes to the gate. And that's where the elders are assembled, and that's where he will stake, or he staked his claim. We have no sense here that Lot has any kind of judicial status. In fact, we'll see very quickly that he is a ger. He's a stranger. He has no land. He presumably has no rights. So you have to ask, what is he doing there? And I think if we look at the parallel, because these stories are quite parallel, the story of Avraham, when the three strangers approach him, and this story, remember that Abraham was sitting in the opening to his tent, and that he rushes out to greet the three men and to offer them hospitality. And I think it's fair to read in here that Lot, as his nephew and one who grew up with him, who was raised in his house, has a similar value. And perhaps he even saw Abraham doing this, sitting there waiting for strangers to offer them hospitality. And here Lot appears to be doing the same thing. And to his credit, it's already evening. And he's still doing it. He's still sitting there, presumably because it is the most dangerous time for strangers to enter the city. And so he doesn't run. No need to run. They're approaching the gates to the city. He sees them, he rises to greet them, and he bows low with his face to the ground. Exactly what Abraham did. And he says to them, Hine Adonai Tsuruna. He says to them, my lords, small L, right? But again, he's putting himself in this kind of servant position as an offerer of hospitality. I'm here to serve you. And he says, turn aside to my house and velinu, and you'll spend the night. And gam rachatzu raglehem, you'll wash your feet, exactly what Abraham said. This idea that they are strangers, they're tired, they've been traveling. And so he'll give them some bodily refreshment, and bathe your feet that you may be on your way. And they say, as we can see, lo, kiva rachov nalinu. No, we'll sleep outside. Rachov is the town square, literally the broad place. So no need. We'll bed down outside, presumably because they want to see what's going to happen. They are putting themselves in the most dangerous position they can. You know, think about people who in our own society, people without homes, the unhoused, who put themselves in grave danger, sleeping outside because they have nowhere to sleep. And here they are given an offer of a bed. No, they want to sleep outside. But we see V'yibsarvahim. He urges them ma'od, a great deal. He's pleading with them. So they do acquiesce and they enter his house. And what does he do? V'yas lahem mishteh. He provides for them. Mishteh is a feast, but specifically with wine. If you look at the root, the root is drinking, right? So it's a feast with wine, and I'm emphasizing that because I think it foreshadows the end of the story. He bakes matzah, right? Unleavened bread. As we saw again in the story of Abraham, this can be made very quickly. Not a whole feast, wine and bread, but the basics of hospitality. So far so good. They're in the house. They've been fed. Their feet are washed. They had something to drink. And now, Terem Yishkavu, before they could even lie down, right? Anshe Ha'ir, Anshe Shechem, the men of the town, in case you were wondering, the men of Sodom, I'm sorry, I said Shechem, but it's Sodom, Anshe Sodom, right? Making it extremely clear. I think it's really, I said men, but Anshe can also mean, women, everyone, the people of the town. And it is everybody, right? Up to the last person gather around the house. I think the Torah is emphasizing this because it wants to emphasize that no one is not complicit here. And we're really echoing back to this negotiation between Abraham and God, where it comes down to even 10. No, every single person is gathered there. This is how they treat strangers in Sodom. The Midrash looks at this and says something, I think, which is not too remote from the text. That the people of Sodom, remember, Sodom is an extremely wealthy city. It is there on the plain. You remember that when Abraham goes and rescues Lot, that the king of Sodom comes out, he says, you take all the stuff, right? I'll just take the captives, right? He doesn't need stuff. It's a wealthy people. So the Midrash looks at this and it says, yes, they have a great deal and they don't want to share. So any stranger that comes, they're going to discourage. Now, how Lot came to be among them, if that's the story, is certainly unclear. Okay, so they shout to Lot and they say, Ayeh hanashim asher ba'u elecha halayla. Where are those men who came to you, right? Hutzi'em eleinu v'neda otam. Bring them out that we may know them. And of course, here the knowledge is, as it is in general in the Torah, sexual knowledge. What they're talking about is homosexual rape. Want to discourage people? It's a pretty strong way to do it. And it's all of them, right? I mean, we get this sense that it will be gang rape, right? This is how strangers are treated in Sodom. And what does Lot do? Lot goes out to the entrance and he shuts the door behind him. So he's there in front of them, guarding the door, and he says, Al na'achai, he says, I beg you, do not do such a terrible thing. And he calls them, it says friends, but I think the text is stronger. Ahai, my brothers. Right? So he's claiming a certain sense of kinship with them. And they're going to reply immediately. And they're going to say, who is this guy? He's a stranger. And then he makes this offer to them. You want some satisfaction? Hinena. Lishte vanot asher lo yadu. I have two daughters who are who have not known a man, in other words, I have two virgin daughters, I will bring them out, and you can do with them ketov be'einechem, whatever is good in your eyes, right? But don't do anything to these men. Ki al kain ba'u b'tzel korati. They have come under the shelter of my roof. So what we have here is radical hospitality of a kind of perverse sort. That Lot will do anything to protect these guests. We have a sense, and this is not just here, but throughout the ancient world, that hospitality is sacred. What's stunning about this, though, is that Lot is going one step further than seems decent, offering his daughters to them, and not just do with them as you will. Chill it, I think, kind of statement. And they will have none of it, right? They say, stand back, and then they say, this guy came here as an alien, and already he acts like a ruler, right? And he says, Ba lagur, he came as an alien, a stranger, V'yishpot shafot ata, and he judges us, right? Shofet is a judge. So I think ruler here has a new, and it's true that judges are rulers, right? But, and you know, how dare he judge us? How dare he tell us what to do? Lot, who just said, ahai, my brothers, is now reminded exactly of what his position is there. And one has a sense that they will do what they do, not only with his guests, but even with him. And then they say, we will deal worse with you than with them. Let me pause here to make mention of something. I think that we even today in our culture, though it's somewhat antiquated, have this idea that sodomites are homosexuals. Right? I don't think that the text bears that out here, or that sodomy is homosexuality. Now, it is true that the Torah in the book of Leviticus condemns homosexuality, calls it a to'eva, something abhorrent, which, by the way, is the same word that's used for eating pork, right? That's also a to'eva. And I want to mention that also because I think that those on the radical right who condemn homosexuality as a terrible sin do seem to be perfectly comfortable eating pork. But that's just an aside. Here, I think the violation is not homosexual. The violation is the violation of hospitality. It isn't consensual homosexuality. And remember, from the Torah's point of view, it's not that homosexuality is forbidden entirely, it's forbidden to Jews, right? There's no sense that the Torah forbids it to non-Jews. Even according to the 7 Noahide laws, which are a rabbinic conception, not in the Torah, but it is read into the Torah, doesn't make homosexuality a sin either. It's not one of the 7. So let's be clear. This we also see something similar that happens with the sin of Onan, which is very much later in the Torah. I don't know that we'll get to it this year, who rather than cohabit with his late brother's wife, spills his seed on the ground. Onanism becomes, therefore, synonymous with masturbation. But that's not what happens there. What happens there is that he refuses to have a child with this woman who he is married according to biblical law, following biblical law. And that's why he spills his seed out onto the ground. He won't actually maintain his brother's name, which was the whole purpose of that law. He wants the sexual intimacy that he would get, but he doesn't want to give up the paternity of this child. And so there too, onanism is really a misreading of the Bible there. Masturbation is not the sin of Onan, and here homosexuality is not the sin of the Sodomites. In fact, hospitality, the violation of hospitality is far more egregious. Okay, so what happens? The men stretch their hand. So what happens? They press against Lot and they move forward to break. So Lot is between them and the door, and they're going to push them all. They're going to push Lot down and they're going to push him to the door. This angry mob. And what happens? The men stretch out their hands. They get Lot. They shut the door. And the people who were at the entrance of the house, both young and old, they struck with a blinding light, so they were helpless to find the entrance. So here we see that these angels really have supernatural power. They're not just there to check things out. They're not just emissaries, but they really can do stuff. Now, they don't kill them, but they blind them, and now they need to help with this blindness, perhaps temporary. It's not really quite clear. So then the men say to Lot, now they're called Anashim again, men. It sort of flips between the angel and the men. To Lot, who else is here? Sons-in-law, your sons, your daughters, anyone else you have in the city, bring them out of the place. So it's time to get out of Dodge, right? He says, grab your family. Now, it's interesting, sons-in-law, right? Considering the fact that he has two virgin daughters. So who are these sons-in-law? One possibility, of course, is that he has other daughters, and they are the husbands of the daughters. But most biblical commentaries, including contemporary ones, don't want to really read this that way. So they say that sons-in-law, and the term here is chatan, right? Like chassan and kala, right? Chatan, the son-in-law. That they were betrothed and not yet married. In antiquity in general, there were two ceremonies. Betrothal was not just the giving of a ring. It was a ceremony which would require divorce in order to undo it. The couple are married to every extent, except that they don't have the ability to sleep with one another yet. This was even true in Jewish tradition in the time of the rabbis, over 1,000 years later. Ultimately, the betrothal ceremony and the marriage ceremony get compressed into one ceremony, which is done entirely under the chuppah. The first part, the betrothal, is the giving of the ring or an object of value, and say, Hareat mikudeshet li, you are sanctified to me, you're betrothed to me, according to the laws of Moses in Israel. And then the Sheva Brachot, the 7 blessings under the canopy, which is the marriage. The idea was they would become formally betrothed. Therefore, no one else could marry these women. Therefore, if they slept with someone else, it would be adultery. But then the husband could work, could get enough money to pay her father the bride price, having reserved her, as it were, so nobody else can jump in. And then, at the appropriate time, they would get married. So I think it's fair, although it's a much later tradition, to see something like that here in antiquity. Sons-in-law, but not quite as we would understand it. Okay. And then he says, get them out. And why? 13, Ki mashchitin anachnu et hamakom. We are going to utterly destroy this place. Similar, the mashchit is also the one who comes to Egypt, wrecking same root. We have this sense that the whole place is going to be destroyed. Why? Because the outcry against them before the Lord has become so great that God has sent us to destroy them. So, crying out of the innocents, it's so great, and we were here to see to it that was true. And now we have a second role. 2 angels. I guess each one can do something, and that is to destroy the place. But what happens? His sons-in-law look at him, ki mitzachek, as one who is jesting, joking. What? Leave here? Right? Leave all this behind? No. And of course, we do have something of a tie back to the story of Abraham linguistically. It was Sarah who was mitzacheket, who was laughing. And here they too are laughing. I'm not suggesting that what they're doing is what she was doing. I just think that part of the beauty of these narratives is their literary quality, the stylistic elements. And we see that here. In addition to the other elements like the hospitality theme, which is carried out. Lot, as I mentioned, seemed to have inherited that family gift of hospitality, but it's gone. And perhaps part of why Lot is so twisted is because he has been in some ways influenced by the place where he lives. The rabbis emphasize the fact that you shouldn't live in a place with bad people. There is a sense of corruption. You can try to stand apart, but it's very hard not to be corrupted. Would Lot have done such a thing before he went and settled in Sodom? And there was a process for Lot of settling in Sodom. First, he went and he pitched his tent there. Then he came near to Sodom in another text. And here now you see he was living there. He had gradually become a full part of that community, though never trusted, never wholly accepted. And so he's been absorbed into the community, and unfortunately, he and we'll see, maybe his family are also corrupt. So what happens? Dawn is breaking, and the angels urge him on, right? So it's been all night. They haven't done anything. The sons-in-laws don't want to go. And finally, the angels say, take your wife and your daughters, and lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city. And he delayed, right? And they take him by the hand and his wife and his daughters in the Lord's mercy on him, Behemlat Adonai alav. That really the city should have died too, right? The whole city should have gone. He was living there. He made his bed. And even though there weren't 10 righteous, right? Sons-in-law don't seem to be righteous. Their daughters, his wife, that's it. And so they take him out and left him outside the city. And they say to him, flee for your life, right? They're like, he's just can't quite extricate himself. And then he says to them, they say, don't look anywhere behind you, right? Flee to the hills or you will be wiped out. So here we got the idea that they shouldn't look back. It would delay them, I think, to turn and to stare. But it also ties to the hesitancy that they seem to be feeling, this pull backwards. And then Lot says to them, oh, you've been so gracious to me. You've already shown me so much kindness to save my life, but I can't make it. It's too late. I won't make it. So there's this little town, right? There's this little town, and it is near enough to flee. It's just a little place. Let me go there. It's a little place. You're going to destroy a lot. Just leave this little place. And the one he talks to says, okay, yes, I'll even do this. I won't annihilate the town of which you've spoken. Hurry and flee there. I can't do anything until you arrive. And he arrives in a place which is called Zohar, right? And remember that it was a little place, mim tsar. It was the Hebrew word little place, and so Zohar, a play on, right? A play on words. Zohar kind of means the little place. And now we're going to get the destruction. Actually, before we get to the destruction, what I'm going to do is we'll just stop for questions for a moment. We've gone through a lot of text. Any comments, questions before the destruction, Sandy?
So, I'm just thinking about Jonah and Nineveh.
Yes.
Before, God wants the people to repent, but there's no indication here of that. And is that because sort of like God involves and God decides later he's not going to just destroy places, give people a chance to repent?
Yeah, well, I think it's not clear to me when we look at these biblical texts, how much this idea of repentance is in these early texts at all. We really had the same problem with the generation of the flood, right? And the rabbis want to read things in. It took hundreds of years for Noah to build the ark. He was hoping. They were reluctant to go in, maybe at the last minute. But the text doesn't really bear that out. I think the sense here is they have been judged. They are guilty in the extreme, and this is an appropriate punishment. Even in later biblical times, murderers who are tried, right, even if they acknowledge their sin and repent, in some sense, express regret, there is a standard which says the sin is great enough. It's not effective. There's no opportunity. And we don't see a sense of that here. We really don't. I mean, it would be nice in some world, but there is something, it's not the same thing, but I would ask, and if Hitler repented? No, there is a point at which, there's a sense of justice which overrides mercy. Anything else about?
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else, Saul?
Yeah, getting back to the Hebrew itself, this was very interesting. In the second sentence of this chapter, Vayomer Hine na Adonai.
Yes.
And, in the Hertz that I have, it says whole. Doesn't mean God, it means my Lord. It's my.
Yes.
Interesting the way they spelled it the same way.
Yes, well, it is spelled the same way. The thing is that Adonai means my Lord. When it's used with reference, it's not clear in the text without the context who is being referred to. Lot, in context, couldn't possibly think that these strangers are God. And if Lot did think that, well, they don't need protection at all, right? So the fact that he refers to them, it's more complicated than that. I think I've mentioned this before. The word Elohim, God, also means judges, right? And so, for example, when we have the case of the slave in the book of Exodus, where he's supposed to be freed in the 7th year, and he does not wish to be freed, they take him El Ha-Elohim to not the gods, but to the judges. And there's a judicial procedure, and his ear is pierced and so on. So, yes, I mean, you're right. It is spelled the same way, but it always is. And when we say Baruch Atah Adonai, what we mean is, blessed are you, Lord, but not Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. We would never say that, because that would be specific, and it would be, I can't even think of the word. The height of arrogance, presumption, however you want to look. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So we're going to go finish the story. So the sun rises, verse 23, and now we get Vehimtir al Sodom, Ve'al Amorah, Gafrit ve'esh me'et Adonai min hashemayim. So sulfurous fire is rained down out of heaven. And I think it's striking that it's himtir, it's rain, right? Fire rain, if you will. And this immediately should remind you of the flood, right? The rain from heaven. So it's worth asking what's going on here. What kind of natural event might have caused such a thing? especially since earlier in the Bible, Lot chooses this place because of its fertility. It is a river valley. How did it get transformed? So there is among geologists some sense, not about this and not about here and not in this time, but there must have been a massive earthquake that helps to create this rift. That in fact, this is a very active. It's between two geological plates. And that in this earthquake there is often lightning when you have an earthquake. That the materials that are there could easily catch fire, that the vegetation could be destroyed. Now, from the point of view of the Bible, this is just a miracle, right? And even if you give a naturalistic explanation, it happens at the moment it's meant to happen. But it is striking that you could come up with a naturalistic explanation for how this place, which should be very fertile, is not. And now we get this famous, in verse 26, the Tabet Ishto me acharav, his wife looked back, right? And then she became Nitziv Melech, and she becomes a pillar of salt. So a couple of things. One way to look at it is that this salt, which is natural to the region, is now raining down, and it simply becomes covered over with this pillar. So she becomes the pillar. It is in the act of looking back at this destruction that from this little place where they are, that this happens. I have to say that, there is something symbolic about this. And I would remind you, and I haven't seen this in the commentaries, and I'm really surprised by that. What was the symbol par excellence in antiquity of hospitality? It was salt. Strangers came and you gave them bread with salt. So in all the ancient cultures, and it really continues up until the modern era. This idea that visitors, not in our culture, right? But this idea that visitors would be given salt. Salt is extremely valuable. It's used as a preservative, in addition to, in a time when they don't have preservatives, expensive. It's a gift that we think of host gifts. This is the favor. You go to the birthday party, they give you a favor. It's something that's given to guests. And it kind of seals this story. It begins with hospitality offered by Lot, and now it ends paradoxically with this symbol of hospitality. This is undoubtedly, or was undoubtedly, some kind of geological, pillar, well known. People would talk about it. They would see it. I'm talking in much later times. There she is. That's the pillar. That was Lot's wife. Now we're going to go back and continue the original story. We're going back to Abraham, back to when we left off. You remember, God finished speaking to Abraham. Now we've had a night. Presumably it was a night back in Sodom and Gemorah where Abraham was. He wasn't going to stand out there all night. God is gone. So he comes back the next morning, and he hurries out to the place which he had stood before the Lord. And he looks down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, all the land of the plain. He sees the smoke of the land rising like the smoke of a kiln. Right? So the question is, what's going through Abraham's mind? So the rabbis do a very interesting thing, I think, in the Midrash. And they find three incidents. This one, the incident with an incident with Abraham, and an incident with Jacob, and they play with the language. And they say these are three places where these patriarchs prayed, and they were the ones who invented prayer. The morning prayer, the afternoon prayer, and the evening. Now, we don't see that here, not explicitly. I think it is a midrash. The rabbis are really reading very creative here. The word that they use here in order to establish this as prayer is the word amad, where he stood, the place of standing. And as you undoubtedly know, one of the words for that statuary prayer, morning, afternoon, and evening, is the Amidah. When Isaac goes out into the field, it says Lasuach Basadeh. This is right before he meets Rebecca. Ein sicha ela tefillah, that this sicha, this talking, this meditation is tefillah. And Jacob, when he puts his head down on a rock, it says vayifga b'makom, he lit upon the place. Ein pigiyah ela tefillah, that there's no alighting except for prayer. And I want to suggest that there's a deeper meaning to these midrashim, not just that they establish this. If you look at the patriarchs at this moment in their lives, these are moments which are fraught with danger and worry. Abraham here is what? Why is he's looking out there, and what is likely in his mind? It's Lot, his nephew. What happened? Right? Where did he make it out? Did he not make it out? And that idea, praying for the welfare of Lot, it's not hard to read that in. Jacob, head on the rock, having run away, empty-handed from everything he knows in the wilderness, fate unknown, brother wants to kill him. It's a time for prayer. Human, spontaneous. Isaac, out in the field, bereft of his mother, lost, meditating, praying, and what comes? As it were, the answer to his prayers. Lifts his eyes, there's Rebecca. Okay, so that's not the text. The text is simply that he's out there and he looks. But you could well ask, why is this here? What does it add? He went back, he saw it. So I do think it cries out in some sense. The Midrash often is simply a text that you ask, why is this here? Why is this word here? What is it there to teach us? And one infers, just as the rabbis read an angel into the story of Joseph when he meets the guy, asks directions. Right here too, I think the rabbis are reading in because there is a kind of lacuna in the text. There's something missing, some difficulty. Okay, So what happened to Lot? And we will see this is the last episode in the story of Lot. After this, he disappears from the Torah. He goes from Zohar. He settles in the hill country with his daughters. He was afraid to live in Zohar. And what does he do? They live in a cave, right? Now we get this story. The older one said to the younger, "Our father is old. There is not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of the world." Now, what do they think? I don't know what they think. Is this just hyperbole? Do they think that the whole world has been destroyed? Do they think that this is a Noah situation? Maybe. Well, at any rate, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, and we will maintain life through our father. So, first of all, sounds like the story of Noah a little bit. After destruction, getting drunk. Not the context here is very different, but you can't help but that feel that resonance. They're never criticized for this in the Torah, which is interesting in itself. You would think, this is pretty bad behavior. And so they make their father drink wine, and the older one goes in and she lays with his father. He didn't know what happened. And the next day she says to her sister, "I did it last night, you do it tonight, so that we can maintain life with our father." So I just want to mention one thing. Remember what their father offered the people of Sodom. Take my virgin daughters, right? This is classic measure for measure in the Torah. Midah keneged midah, right? This is the payback. This is what goes around comes around, right? And he doesn't know. Right? Presumably, he would never have consented. Maybe he would have. I don't know. And then we get this kind of bit of etymology, and they became pregnant, and the older one bears him a son named Moab. This is now going to be the father of the Moabites, right? Why? Moab is, if you look, you could read it Me'av, from father, right? This is the child from father. And again, the younger one has a son, and she calls him Ben Ami, the son of my people, which also is suggestive of that. And he is the father of Bnei Ammon, right, the Ammonites. So the Moabites and the Ammonites are a result of this relationship. And this incestuous relationship. And then, ultimately, one Moabite will, in the time of Ruth, will become part of the Jewish people. And, the mother of, etc., David, and ultimately the Messiah. So it's hard to read something too pejorative into this text. Okay, enough with that. I thought we were going to get to the next little story, and apparently we are not. So my art history lesson will get put off till next week. But I do want to open it up because we are at the end of our time. Any questions? Janet, then Francis.
I'd like to know, getting back to the fire, does this kind of remind you of what happened in California?
Yeah, we do have a sense of that. Certainly the scorching, right?
Yeah.
But the here, I mean, it's clear and undoubtedly there were great fires in antiquity, right? But it's not, but this is really being shown as something quite supernatural. Fire rains down. It's specific. It's the entire area in total devastation.
Right.
So, but yes, it's hard not to think of it
Yeah.
as in light of, in light of current events. Francesca.
I'm glad you raised the question of what's this business with Abraham being there? Because I was completely confused about that. He just sort of shows up out of nowhere? Was he somewhere in the neighborhood? How does this happen?
What you mean his turning up and looking down?
Yes.
Okay. Well, remember that he and God were talking,
Right.
right? And then the angels are going down from there. So he's on a high place, right? He goes home, not far, because remember that the angels came and he was in his tent. Seems to be close to this overview of Sodom. And now he's gone back. He wants to see what happened.
So he was in the neighborhood anyway.
He's there anyway. And,
Okay.
he made a bargain. He doesn't know. 10 people, you'll spare the plate. Well, did he? Were there? And what happened to Lot, I think, has to be on his mind as well.
Of course. Okay, thanks very much. I was wondering, it just totally threw me when they said, all of a sudden they're talking about Abraham. What does he have to do with all this stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So anything else before we go? Okay, so we're going to pick up next time. We're going to see another story about Abraham passing his wife off as his sister. This time not in Egypt, but in Gerar. And one of the things we're going to look at is the difference between those two stories. I hope I've convinced you that, stories in the Torah have to be read intertextually, that you cannot appreciate them except in the context of the other stories in Genesis. That they really do play off each other. They play off in terms of language, words, which repeat. They play off of in terms of themes, which repeat. It's fair, I think, to see, for example, the story we looked at in light of the story of the destruction of the world through the flood. We see a parallel there, and reading the two stories in light of each other. Certainly the story of Sodom, which is directly afterwards and clearly connected, but the theme of hospitality, one reflects the other, similarities, differences. On that note, I wish you a great week. I hope to see you again next week. And in the meantime, and we'll come back for a little, very, very little bit of art history also. So I hope I've whetted your appetite for that. And I will see you then.